The crow came into her dreams the night after the house of the Undying burned. Daenerys stood again amidst the warped, blackened stones, though she knew the tower had collapsed in the waking world and the warlocks lay dead or scattered. The sky above Karth was gone. In its place stretched a vault of pale gray, veined with red like faintly bleeding marble. A wind without breath moved through what remained of the city, and the air tasted of ash and the bitter, cloying tang of shade of the evening. Her dragons were tiny shapes of ember and shadow at her feet. Drogon's black wings flared, his eyes twin coals as he hissed at something she could not see. Viserion and Regal circled her ankles in restless loops, their scales whispering across the broken tiles. "Where are we?" Daenerys whispered. "This is not a place," the old voice said from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is a root." A tree rose before her where the door of the house had been, a tree that could not be. It was vast, its trunk pale as bone, its bark carved by wind and time into the suggestion of a face. Blood ran from its eyes in slow, sticky tears that smoked when they hit the ground. Its branches climbed into the red-veined sky and beyond, their tips vanishing into a darkness that felt deeper than night. A three-eyed crow sat upon one of those branches. Its feathers were the sleek black of a maester's robe, but its third eye, set above the other two, gleamed red as a garnet. It looked down at her with all three eyes at once, and Daenerys felt herself laid bare. Every half-forgotten childhood fear and bravos, every hunger in the manse with her brother, every shame, every longing. Rhaegar's songs, Viserys' hand, the feel of warm sand beneath her feet when Drogo had lifted her high, the heat of Drogon's fire. "Who are you?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. Her dragons pressed closer, their tiny bodies radiating warmth. "I am memory," said the crow, "and history, and the long, slow will of the world. I have been called many things: Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, the hand that held the realm, the king's shadow. To you, I am the voice that called to you in the flames." It hopped once along the branch, and the weirwood shuddered. "Bloodraven," Daenerys repeated softly. The name was like the taste of old books and whispered tales at Maester's elbows, though she had never had a Maester of her own. Yet she had heard something like it from Ser Jorah perhaps, in the long days across the Red Waste. "You are in Westeros, deep beneath the snow, beneath stone and ice and roots." The crow cocked its head. "And yet also here, the roots of the great trees run under seas and mountains, under deserts where dragons once slept in fire. The world is one body, Daenerys Targaryen. You stand upon a nerve that still remembers." She glanced at the weirwood's bleeding face. "The house is ruined. I burned it." A flicker of amusement disturbed the wind. "You burned a tower of tricks, illusions set in the shallows of the mind. What they built here was a graft, grafted onto older things they did not understand. Dragon's blood called me along that wounded route when you drank their cursed wine and walked their hall. Now that hall is ash, but the root remains, and so do you." "Why?" she demanded, anger rising sharp as Drogon's hiss. "Why show me those visions? My brother with his crown of rubies. The iron throne covered in snow. A house with a red door that was not mine. Why anything? What do you want of me?" The crow spread its wings. Snow swirled from nowhere, mingling with gray ash, and for a heartbeat Daenerys smelled cold, clean air like none she had known since the Dothraki Sea. The air of another land, another sky. "I did not show you those things, child. The warlocks sought to drown you in their fancies, to bind you to their tower as they bind their acolytes. But you are Dragonfire. You burned through all their veils at once, and what bled through the rents was truth." The weirwood's bleeding eyes flared brighter. In their depths she saw herself, a girl in a smoky hall, blood on her hands. She saw King's Landing from above, the city a nest of serpents coiled around a hill of swords. She saw a wall of ice stretching from one side of the world to the other, and beyond it, cold blue eyes and dead men walking. When the world is cut, it bleeds in both directions, into past and future both. "I am only a watcher on the far side of the cut." Daenerys lifted her chin. I am no child. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, mother of dragons. I will take my kingdom back with fire and blood. I do not need a crow to whisper in my ear. The crow's third eye brightened, and now she felt the weight of its gaze like a hand upon the back of her neck. Do you think conquest is ruled only by steel and flame? It asked. Dragons die, kings burn, cities fall and rise and fall again. Your house learned too late that fire without sight is madness. Would you rule for a season, as your father did, until the realm rose to tear you down? Or for an age? The word realm slid through her like a knife. She thought of the Iron Throne again, not as the warlocks had shown it, but as she had heard it described. 1,000 swords twisted together, sharp and cold and cruel. She thought of the small folk in the alleys, the slaves who wore no collars but belonged all the same, to fear and hunger and men with power. I would be different, she said. I would make a better world. Then you must see that world before you break it, the crow said. You must see how far its roots spread, how deep the rot goes. I can teach you to look along the veins of time, to see what may be as well as what is and was. Her mouth was dry. Green dreams, she whispered. Like the Crannog men. Like the boy with the wolf's blood, yes. The crow's tone softened, as much as such a thing could. He is on his way to me now, walking through snow and old songs toward the cave where my body lie. Yes. But he is not enough. North and south, ice and fire. The night gathers, Daenerys Targaryen, and there must be more than one torch. Drogon's small body pressed against her bare foot. His skin was fever-hot, his wings twitching. She looked down and saw her dragons watching the weirwood's face with eyes as bright as any ruby. Their pupils had gone to thin black slits. Smoke curled from Drogon's nostrils. What would you have me do? She asked quietly. Learn, said the crow. Root yourself as I did. Open your eyes. And the price. The weirwood's branches shivered. Snow ash fell all around them in a silent storm. Everything worth anything has a price, child. You will see more than your burning city. You will see the lies men tell themselves, and the cruelties they excuse in the dark. You will see how those you love may betray you, and how those you hate may still be needed. You will be tempted to close your eyes. If you shut them, you will rule as your forebears did, blind and briefly. If you keep them open, you will never be at peace again. Daenerys thought of Viserys screaming as molten gold poured over his head, of Drogo slipping away step by step, of the blackened body of her child that was not a child, of the thousands of slaves crucified outside Meereen in the stories Yora had told her, dying in the heat with their tongues swollen and black. Peace is a lie, something in her whispered, the echo of a foreign saying she had never learned. The world is blood and fire. If she had to bleed her own peace upon the altar of a better world, she would. Show me, she said. The crow leaped. It flew at her face, all three eyes burning, and the weirwood's roots erupted from the stones beneath her bare feet, coiling around her ankles, her calves, her thighs. They were smooth and cold, and yet she felt them pushing into her skin without breaking it, spreading under it like veins of ice. She tried to scream, but the sound turned to a hiss of steam as heat surged up through her body from her heart outward, meeting the cold roots halfway. Fire and sap twined. Her vision split. For an instant she stood beside herself, looking down upon a small silver-haired woman with 3 tiny dragons clinging to her shoulders and hair. For an instant she was the weirwood, feeling the slow movements of the earth beneath Karth. For an instant she was the crow, feathers and bone and hollow bones filled with wind. Then she was none of those things and all of them. The world opened. She saw the red waste from above, a rust-colored scar on the land. She saw Vis Teloro as the bones of a dead beast, its eyes filled with stagnant water. She saw the Skahazaden winding green and foul between the yellow cities, and Meereen's pyramids like jagged teeth on the horizon. Beyond them, the narrow sea glittered like hammered steel, and on its far side rose a land of green and gray, Westeros. She saw the neck, a maze of reeds and bogs where men the size of children with eyes like frogs moved silently through the water. She saw the gold and green plains of the Reach, the red mountains of Dorne, the bleak crags of the Vale, the red keep of kings landing like a crown of brick and iron upon Aegon's hill. She saw a boy with a sword of cold blue steel standing on a walkway atop the wall, his breath steaming in the air. Jon. She knew him without knowing how. Ghost stood at his side, eyes red as weirwood sap, for glimmering pale in the starlight. She saw a woman in a lion's skin gown sitting on the Iron Throne, her crown heavy with rubies. Cersei, wine-dark rage simmering under her skin. She saw men around her muttering, plotting. A tall man with golden hand and haunted eyes. A spider in silk. A little man with mismatched eyes and a mind sharper than any sword. She saw, too, what lay beyond the wall. Dead forests, frost-furred stones, pale shapes moving through the night. Blue eyes opened in the dark in their thousands, and when they turned toward her, for a heartbeat she felt cold so deep it cracked her bones. Drogon roared and the vision broke. Daenerys fell to her knees upon the broken tiles of the ruined square. Her dragons scattered, squealing, little wings beating frantically. Her chest heaved. Every part of her felt stretched and scraped, as if she had been dragged through the eye of a needle. The house of the Undying was gone. In its place lay a heap of blackened stone, still smoldering faintly, though the fire had burned a day and a night. The moon hung low above Karth, fat and yellow, peering down like a leering face. Her hand shook as she pressed it to the ground. The tiles were hot from the day's sun and her own fire, but beneath them she could feel something else, something slower and deeper, the faint, patient pulse of roots. "You are awake," said the crow's voice from inside her skull. Daenerys stumbled to her feet. That was real? Real enough. You saw through my eyes, and through the memories of the trees, and through the dreams of your own blood. It will be easier next time. Harder also. She closed her eyes, only to find that closing them made the after-images dance more fiercely against her lids. Jon upon the wall, Cersei on the throne, the blue-eyed dead. "What am I to do with this?" she whispered. "What can I do? Here, in this city of liars and perfumed thieves?" "Rule it," came the answer. "Learn, practice. Every root must grow somewhere. This one begins in Karth. It need not end here." Drogon crawled up her leg, claws digging through her torn silk. When she scooped him up, he twined around her arm, head pressed against her cheek. Through the lingering echo of the vision, she could feel the dragon's mind. A hot, wild thing full of hunger and command and the pure joy of flight. For an instant she saw herself as he saw her. Tall and terrible, wreathed in flame, a figure of light against the dark. "Fire and blood," Daenerys murmured into his scales. "Fire and roots." The crow laughed, softly within her. So began the schooling of the Dragon Queen. In the days that followed, Karth felt smaller. Xaro Zoan Daxos came to her with smiles and soft hands and wheedling promises, the air around him thick with myrrh. She watched his lips as he spoke of ships and jewels and coffered chests, and at the same time she watched him from elsewhere. His jade and silver palace with its hidden doors, the dark rooms where his servants murmured over account rolls, his face when he was alone and his smile had fallen away. Seeing from far away was easier when she had something to hold. Bloodraven taught her to anchor herself in living things, in a lizard clinging to Xaro's fountain, in a parrot preening on its perch, in a stray cat weaving between servants' legs. She would reach with her mind as he had shown her, feel the world as if it were a map drawn on the inside of her skull, and slip. From the lizard's low vantage, she tasted the damp coolness under the fountain's lip, smelled algae and stone. Xaro loomed above like a painted statue, his skin gleaming with oil. From the parrot's eyes, she saw him pace his bedchamber in agitation after he left her, muttering about dragons and costs, about loss and gain. He thought her a fool he could polish and place upon a shelf, a pretty queen for his own court. "Do you see?" murmured the crow when she returned to herself, the world in her own eyes again. "Men speak one truth with their mouths and another with their movements. Sight shows both. Words are wind, Daenerys said, remembering something old as well as new. One of the things she had seen in the weirwood's eyes had been a gray man leaning on a staff, telling a boy that very thing. The wind changes. Words are wind, but all winds leave patterns in the sand. It was not only Xaro she watched. She rode the bodies of gulls over the Carthene harbor, counted the ships rocking at anchor on green water, tasted tar and salt. She slipped into the minds of rats that scurried in the walls of the 13, listened as traders whispered of her dragons and the price they might fetch in one market or another. She perched inside the skull of a monkey chained outside the House of the Undying's ruins and heard the curses of the warlocks as they spat at her name. When she slept, the dreams came easier. She saw again the wall and the boy in black, snow in his hair. She saw a dark lord with blue eyes raise a hand, and corpses shuddered and stood. She woke with her heart hammering and sweat cold on her skin, though the night was warm. She saw also the Iron Throne, always the throne, but now the pictures shifted every time. Sometimes it was Cersei sitting, her face pale and strained. Sometimes it was a boy with a cruel mouth and a crown too big for his head. Sometimes the throne was empty, and snow lay thick upon the swords, and the hall around it was silent. Once, only once, she saw herself upon it. Her hair was silver still, but shorter, as if burned. Her eyes were shadowed. Her hands were red up to the elbows, though whether with blood or with reflected fire she could not tell. The city outside her windows burned. People screamed. She sat very straight, staring into the flames, and for a moment Daenerys loved and feared that woman in equal measure. "This," said Bloodraven quietly, "is one of the roads you may walk." "I would never," she began, and then remembered Viserys' face as he screamed. Her father, whom she had never known, laughing as he muttered, "Burn them all." She swallowed the words. "I do not want to be that." "Then do not be," the crow said. "Sight shows you paths, not chains. But know that if you close your eyes, you will walk blind toward whatever end your feet find." She learned to ask for other visions, other roads. What if she stayed in Qarth and became Xaro's plaything and queen? She saw herself wrapped in jewels, her dragons taken and locked away, her belly heavy with a child that was not Drogo's. She saw her spirit thin like watered wine. What if she turned her back on Westeros and built a kingdom in the east instead? She saw the yellow cities under her banners, saw ships bearing her sigil across the Jade Sea, saw dragons wheeling over Lung. She saw, too, a tide of darkness rolling down from the north years later, long after she had ceased to look, swallowing her distant homeland in snow and silence. "What good is ruling here, if the world dies there?" she murmured, watching white swallow the wall. "Justice comes in circles," said the crow. "Sometimes they are large ones." He showed her two nearer things. The streets of Astapor, where men with whips walked behind lines of unsmiling slaves. A red brick plaza where boys were made to strangle one another for their master's amusement. A square where child after child hung nailed to a post, their small bodies broken, left as warnings to the others. The sight made dragonglass shards in her chest. "Take me there," she whispered. "Your feet can do that," Bloodraven said. "Your will. I merely showed you where the path begins." She rose at dawn and summoned Yora and the others. "We go to Astapor," she told them, her voice steady. "There are slaves who need freeing. You cannot save them all, Khaleesi," Ser Yora said gently. "The world is full of chains. Then I will break as many as I can," she said, "and teach the rest to break their own." The crow chuckled in the back of her mind. "There is more than fire in you, child. That will serve." In Astapor she bought the Unsullied, but nothing went quite as the city's masters expected. Krasny's Emonaklas watched her from beneath his perfumed beard, eyes full of contempt. He spat insults in Valyrian, thinking she did not understand, called her slut and whore and little girl. Daenerys smiled through it all, Missandei's soft translations falling like rain upon a roof that no longer needed them. She could hear Krasny's words, but she could also see him when he thought himself unwatched. The way high. Hands trembled when he counted coin, the way he flinched at the sound of distant drums. Once she slipped into the body of a fly crawling along his wine cup and saw, from close enough to smell his sour sweat, the fear hiding behind his cruelty. He had seen dragons in his dreams these last weeks. She realized, had woken with the taste of ashes in his mouth. He was more afraid of her than he would ever admit. Why? She asked Bloodraven one night, as she watched the unsullied march in perfect lines across the training yard through the eyes of a stray dog. Men who trade in flesh fear being boiled in their own skins. The crow said, they know what they deserve deep down in their marrow. What they cannot imagine is a world where such trade ends. To them, power and cruelty are the same thing. You frighten him because your power grows from another root. Dragons, she said. Dragons and something older. She followed the scenes she remembered from her waking life, but this time they unfolded with a deeper sharpness. When she agreed to trade Drogon for all the Unsullied in Astapor, Ser Yora's face tightened with pain, but she saw too the tiny, flickering relief in the eyes of a freedman who had watched her dragons with dread. When she handed Krasny's the whip, she felt through Drogon's mind the flare of fury and confusion, the dragon's hunger sharpening at the scent of fear. She had seen a road where she accepted the bargain in truth, where she sailed away with an army but no dragons, where her enemies learned to kill Unsullied in thousands while Dragonfire would have burned their ships in moments. She had seen another where she refused, turned back, clutched her dragons to her breast and left the slaves to their fate. She chose a third. Unsullied, she cried, standing tall in her torn, dusty gown, every word clear and sharp in the harsh air. Her heart hammered, but the power coiled under her feet made each breath easier. You are slaves no longer. Throw down your spears. You are free men. If you would stay, stay as free soldiers. If you would go, go. No man will hurt you for it. This is my word as Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, and as the seer of roots and flame. The last phrase needed no translation. It rolled through the ranks like a gust of hot wind. The Unsullied did not move at once. They were too well trained for that. But she felt, through the eyes of a sparrow perched on a pyramid, the tiniest shift ripple through them. A breath held, a heel lifted. Dracarys, she whispered to Drogon, and saw in her mind the path of fire before it came. Saw Krasny's face melt in terror into blistered ruin. Saw the slave soldiers watching with wide, dark eyes. Saw Astapor burn. This time, though, she reached farther. Through the weirwoods that clung to life in private gardens and atop rich men's roofs, far from their northern cousins but kin all the same, she felt the city's soil like skin under her palms. She tasted the river. She sensed every bolt of cloth, every amphora of oil, every dried meat ration in the storehouses. Knowledge threaded through her like another kind of fire. Not all of it, she said to herself. Not all must burn. Drogon's flame washed over the slave trader, over the master's ranks. Brick blackened and cracked, silk shriveled to ash. Men screamed and ran, yet the fire bent where she willed it to bend. It curved away from the storehouses she had seen in her vision, jumped harmlessly over the square where women and children huddled. Later, when the smoke cleared and the red bricks steamed, she walked through the wreckage with Missandei and Grey Worm at her side. The dead lay thick in the streets. Masters and soldiers, and some who had merely been standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. War was war, but the city stood. The granaries remained. The wells had not boiled dry. You saw, Grey Worm said, in his new, careful common tongue. There was a question in his voice, a wonder. You knew where fire would fall. I saw enough, Daenerys answered. Enough to choose where it should not. The freedmen looked at her with awe and terror. They called her Mysa in the days that followed, as they had before in another life, but their prayers took on a new refrain now. Mother, they whispered in the alleys and the baths. Her eyes see all. She knows. She did not, of course. Not yet. Not nearly. Every day she walked the city with her bare feet on its stones, feeling the faint hum of its rootedness under her toes. There were no true heart trees here, no pale trunks with carved faces, but in hidden courtyards she found fig trees and olives, palms whose roots had tangled with older, buried things. She sat beneath them and closed her eyes and learned to sink. She watched men plot against her in shuttered rooms, saw daggers passed from hand to hand. She saw a group of former slave catchers meeting in the ruins of an old bathhouse, their faces masked. She saw, through the eyes of a cat on the roof, the sign they scraped into the dust. A harpy with bleeding hands. "The sons," she said when she rose, her back aching from the cool stone. "They have not yet named themselves, but they are here already." "What will you do?" Missandei asked. "Let them draw breath a while longer," Daenerys murmured. "When men plot treason, they gather. Gathered men are easier to burn or bind. I will watch, then I will choose." She could already see some of the paths. In one, she answered every insult with crucifixion, set bodies along the roads from horizon to horizon. The harpies grew in that world, feeding upon fear, burrowing deep into the city's bones. In another, she forgave all when they knelt and wept. In that gentler future, knives slipped into shadows and throats alike. Her justice taught them that her mercy could be fooled. She began to work along a narrower road. When she found a meeting, she would send the unsullied, not with torches but with ropes and chains. The Harpimas. Ked men were dragged into the light, their faces stripped bare. Their names were shouted in the marketplaces. They were made to look into the eyes of those they had hunted as they spoke their own condemnations. Some she hanged, some she spared, and set to hard work building sewers and aqueducts, their ankle chains clinking as reminders. The freedmen murmured that she was soft. The nobles whispered that she was a butcher. Neither was quite true, and both were. She bled for every choice. "Is this ruling?" she asked Bloodraven one night, staring up at a foreign lattice of stars from her balcony. "Is this what it means? To sit and watch every cruelty and weigh it in your hands? I thought it would be more. Glory?" The crow suggested dryly. "Triumph? Songs and banners and men throwing down their swords? Those are the flowers. This is the root." "I thought it would feel worth the cost," she said. "Sometimes I am not sure, yet you go on." She thought of the little girl she had seen in her visions, nailed to a milepost. In another road, that child had died unnamed, her body pecked at by crows. In this one, Daenerys had recognized the place before she reached it. She had sent riders ahead, and the girl had come stumbling into the sunlight, half dead, but breathing. Her name was Nala. She laughed, now, when she ran with the other freed children, though sometimes Daenerys caught her staring at her hands as if expecting to see nails driven through them. "Yes," Daenerys said, "I go on." So the roots thickened. News of the Dragon Queen with the all-seeing eyes spread. Merchants carried the tales across bay and steppe, weaving truth and fancy until men in Volantis and Pentos swore she had a third eye in the middle of her forehead and could drink thoughts like wine. In Meereen, she found pyramids taller and prouder than Astapors, and a hatred more subtle, but the same patterns of chains. She freed, she fought, she ruled. She married Hisdar zo Lorak to buy peace and let the fighting pits open, though every part of her shuddered at the thought of blood for sport. In one vision, she had seen what happened if she refused. A slow, grinding war that left the city a ruin before she ever crossed the sea. In another, she saw herself embrace the pits holy, sitting in a gilded box while men cut one another apart for her amusement. She chose the narrow, bitter third path again. Pit fights under stricter rules, grain prices fixed, feasts for freedmen as well as masters. When plague ships came to the bay, she saw them a day before the first oars dipped into brown water, slipping her mind into the body of a gull that soared laughing in the wind. The gull smelled sickness before any human nose could. Its thoughts were simple: food, wind, mate, but its senses were keen. She followed them to the rotting hull drifting toward her harbor, its deck strewn with corpses. "Turn them away," she ordered the harbor master, her voice flat. "Khaleesi, we do not even know." "I do," she said. "They bring a pale mare with them. If you let them dock, half my city will die. Turn them away. Burn any ship that flies such colors again." Later, when whispers of a plague ravaging villages along the coast reached them, killing rich and poor alike, the people of Meereen looked at her with new fear and reverence. "She knows," they said. "She knows before it happens." They began to tell stories. How she had walked in a man's dream and plucked poison from his cup. How she had spoken to a woman in the night and told her to flee, and when the woman left her house it collapsed behind her. None of those tales had happened as they were told, but sometimes they brushed a truth. Daenerys walked not only in beasts now, but in men, briefly, lightly, as one might put a hand on another's sleeve. Enough to feel a heartbeat, a fear. "Is this wrong?" she asked Bloodraven, after the first time she had slipped into a freedman's dream to still his terror. The man had been one of those crucified children, grown taller but not grown free inside. In his dream, she had untied him from the post with her own hands. "Wrong?" The crow clicked its beak. "You cannot walk for long, nor far. You cannot command them as you could a dragon, not unless they are empty already. You taste only what is on the surface. If you use sight to ease pain, is that wrong? If I use it to sway them?" The question had sat in her throat like a stone since Astapor. To make them love me? She remembered another vision. Herself on the Iron Throne, the city burning. There had been love in the faces she saw there, yes, but it was a terrible, worshipful love, the kind men gave to storms and wildfires. She had felt lonely upon that throne, lonelier than she had ever been in the manse in Pentos with her brother. "Use fire to warm or to burn," the crow said. "Use sight to heal or to rule utterly. The power cares not. Only you do." "I will not be a god," she said, fiercely enough that Drogon stirred from his sleep atop the pyramid, his wing twitching. "You are a girl with dragons," Bloodraven answered. "Gods are stories men tell themselves about forces too large to grasp. If you remember you are a girl, you will be safer than most gods." She laughed despite herself. "If I remember I am small, you mean? If you remember you are not all." Yet as the moons turned and Meereen grew quieter, she found it harder and harder to keep that sense of smallness. News came from the west on slow, creaking ships. Kings and queens rose and fell. Joffrey died, poisoned in his own hall. His brother Tommen wore a crown too heavy for him. His mother pulled the strings. Stannis Baratheon marched north. The Night's Watch called for aid. Crows gathered on the wall. Daenerys could go there in a heartbeat, in dream. She could feel the cold wind on her ghost skin, taste salt and snow, watch Jon command men twice his age. He changed as seasons turned. He grew harder. He died once in one vision, a knife driven into his heart by a man he trusted. She woke screaming, her hand pressed to her own breast as if to staunch the wound. "Is that fixed?" she demanded of Bloodraven. "Will he die if I do not go?" "Nothing is fixed," the old man in the crow's feathers said. "You know this, child. You have walked more roads than most queens will dream of. Some paths run stronger than others. Some are grooves in the wood, worn deep by the weight of many choices. But any can be leapt." "How?" she whispered. "How do I leap them? How do I know which step matters?" "You don't. You step anyway." Ships burned in the bay. Her enemies massed beyond the walls. Disease stalked the alleys. All the while, across the sea, a kingdom she had never seen but had dreamed of every night slid nearer to its own oblivion. It was not one grand vision that changed her course. It was 1,000 small ones. A boy in flea bottom sitting by a dying fire, whispering a prayer to no god in particular for food. A woman on the King's Road huddling her children close when armed men rode past, hoping they would not be noticed. Shepherds in the Reach watching the sky nervously, expecting dragons, though there were none. The wall and the dead things beyond it. One night she watched the others attack a wildling camp through the eyes of a half-starved crow perched in a tree. She felt the crow's terror as blue light washed over the snow, as swords of ice shattered steel, as screams cut short. When one of the white shadows raised a hand, the dead stirred, fingers clawing their way through snow. "Enough!" she gasped, ripping herself free. She staggered to the balcony, her stomach heaving. She had thought she had grown used to horror. She had not. "You cannot close your eyes," the crow told her, not unkindly. "You can only choose when to look away." "I am tired of looking," she said. "I am tired of seeing every wound and being too far to bind it." "Then go closer." The dawn that broke over Meereen the next morning found Daenerys already at council. "We sail for Westeros," she told them. Dario tilted his head, gold tooth flashing. "At last, my queen remembers where she was headed." "Tyrion says your foothold here is not yet secure," Missandei murmured. The little man watched her with narrowed eyes, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had come to her half-broken, reeking of wine and despair, but his mind was razor-sharp. Daenerys had slipped into the eyes of a rat once to watch him pace his tiny cabin, muttering sums and names. She had never seen anyone think so fast. "My grip here will never be secure," she said. "Not if I stay 100 years. The chains here grew for centuries. I can weaken them, break them in places, plant new things in the cracks. But across the sea, roots I do not see are wrapping around the throat of my realm. If the dead come south and the wall falls, nothing I have done here will matter." Tyrion's eyes flickered. "That is dramatic, Your Grace, even for a Targaryen." She looked at him and, for an instant, saw a different Tyrion, older, sitting at a table in a room full of green light, listening to the screams from above as wildfire ate a fleet. She saw him standing atop a wall, his face splashed with someone else's blood, screaming for men to hold. She saw him cradling a cup of wine, weeping where no one could see. He had walked his own roads. "The dead are marching," she said simply. "I have seen them." There was laughter, disbelief, angry mutters. Dragons they could accept, that was legend given scale and wing. Dead men walking sounded like an old woman's tale. She let them speak. She had seen this council 100 times in 100 ways, in her visions. In some she shouted, and they shouted back, and she struck the table and they left her. In others she remained silent and let them talk themselves into inaction. Now she chose a third road. "Come," she said to Tyrion, beckoning him forward like a conjurer. Light poured in from the open balcony behind her. Dust motes danced in it, bright and lazy. "When you were hand in King's Landing, my lord," she said, "how many secrets did you keep with ravens?" "As many as I had fingers," he said warily. "More. Ravens can be intercepted," she said. "Read, killed. A man can forget a message or choose to twist it. Sit." He did. His legs were too short for the chair. His feet dangled. He looked absurd and dangerous at once. Daenerys came to stand behind him and rested her hands lightly on his shoulders. She could feel the tense line of his spine, the wary readiness of a man who expected betrayal from every quarter. "Breathe," she told him. "Your Grace, if this is some Meereenese rite." "Breathe," she said again, more firmly. "Look." She reached down, not into any beast, but into the thin air between his eyes and the light. She had never done this before on purpose. It was a leap in the dark. For a moment nothing happened. Then, like a bubble rising through water, a vision surfaced between them. A gray shale cliff, slick with ice. A line of black-clad men moving along it, tiny against the vastness of the wall behind them. A horn blowing, distant and eerie. Tyrion gasped. His fingers dug into the arms of the chair. "What?" His voice came out strangled. "What is this? What are you doing to me?" "Showing you what I see," Daenerys said softly. "Look." The vision sharpened. Snow swirled. A shape moved in the white, a thing like a man made of carved ice and moonlight. Its eyes were blue, impossibly blue. When it turned its head, Tyrion flinched. "That is north of the wall," he whispered, horrified. "I have stood there. I have peered into that darkness. But I never—" He broke off, eyes wide. The dead moved then, pouring out of the trees like a tide, and the men in black fell back in chaos. She let Tyrion watch a heartbeat more, just long enough to see a corpse rise again under blue-eyed command, before she closed her own eyes and pulled them both free. They were in the council. Chamber again. Sweat stood on Tyrion's brow. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. 7 hells, he said hoarsely. You did that without a drop of milk of the poppy, without a mushroom, without any of Pycelle's poisons. She half smiled. I am my own maester. He swallowed. If that is real. It is real, she said. And it is coming. I cannot tell you what to believe. I can only show you what I see and say, this is the world. You are my counselor. Counsel me. He wiped his hands on his tunic. Then I counsel you to go west, your grace, he said quietly. With all speed. You have dragons. You have eyes no one else has. If you stay here, playing Queen of Pyramids, you will win a city and lose a continent. There were more arguments, of course. There were logistics, ships, sieges, treaties with Yunkai and Volantis. But the decision had been made the moment she saw the crow's eye view of the wildling camp torn apart. It only took time for the waking world to catch up. She left Meereen not as she had once, amid riots and half-accomplished reforms, but more cautiously. She set councils of freedmen in place, men and women whose hearts she had watched in quiet moments. Seen them sit with sick children, share food when they had little, stand between others and knives. She left behind a garrison of Unsullied, commanded by Grey Worm, whose loyalty was a root she no longer doubted. She planted, as best she could, seeds that might grow in her absence. They will need you, Khaleesi, Grey Worm said as he clasped her forearm before she boarded the ship. He was no longer quite so stiff as he had been. Meereen had given him words, and she had given him choices. They will have each other, she said. And me a little still. She had learned to look back from afar. Meereen would never leave her fully. Will you watch us? He asked. She thought of the weight of 1,000 eyes, of the boy on the wall and the dead in the woods, of King's Landing simmering like a kettle left on a slow fire. When I can, she said honestly. When I must. But also, Grey Worm, you must learn to watch yourselves. He nodded as if this made sense. Perhaps it did. She hoped it did. The sea wind tasted of salt and freedom as the ship pulled away from the harbor. Dragons wheeled overhead, larger now, their shadows stretching long over the yellow water. The city shrank behind her, its pyramids rising like fingers in farewell. Ahead lay the narrow sea, and beyond it, the land of her birth and of 1,000 visions. Westeros. The first sight of Dragonstone took her breath away. She had seen it 100 times in dream, rising from the sea like the skull of some immense dragon, its towers and battlements shaped into scales and spines. Yet dream had not captured the way the waves smashed against its black base, sending up spray that stung her face, or the cries of gulls wheeling madly in the wind. This was our home, she whispered, standing at the prow as the castle loomed nearer. Before we were exiles. Your mother died here, Tyrion said quietly at her shoulder. Or so I've read. It seems a grim cradle for a child. It will be a better throne room, she answered. The words surprised her. She had imagined the Red Keep for so long that the idea of ruling from anywhere else felt like treason to her younger self. Yet as she stepped ashore and climbed the long, steep steps, listening to the waves boom and the dragons screech overhead, she felt something settle in her bones. Dragonstone had roots. Not weirwood, no, but roots of volcanic stone and old magic. Aegon had chosen it for a reason. She found the carved table that had been Aegon's, map of Westeros etched into its surface in relief. Her fingers brushed the grooves of rivers and mountains, cities marked with little keeps and crowns. This is where he planned his conquest, she murmured, where he placed his pieces. And where you will plan yours, Tyrion said. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling. The light slanted through narrow windows, catching dust motes in its beams. In her mind's eye, she saw the same table stained with blood. She saw herself sweep pieces from it in rage. She saw a dozen different councils gathered around it, voices raised in argument. She could also see other things now, hear more clearly than she had during all her days in the East. When she closed her eyes and placed both palms flat on the oak, she felt the island under her feet. in a way she had not since Karth and Astapor. There was old power here coiled deep in the rock. Volcanoes slumbered beneath the sea, their slow heartbeats like distant drums. In cracks and crevices where no man's eyes had peered in centuries, pale fungi glowed faintly. In a cave beneath the castle, something else gleamed. She followed the gleam. "What are you doing?" Tyrion asked, as she drew back with a small gasp. "Looking," she said. "Come." The torches spat and hissed as they descended into the bowels of the island. The air grew cooler, damper, and yet somewhere ahead she smelled something like lightning, sharp, clean, ancient. In the cavern, the walls were studded with dragonglass. Black, glassy blades jutted from stone like teeth, catching the torchlight and swallowing it. There were hundreds of them, thousands. The floor glittered with shards. Her dragon's cries echoed off the walls, warping into something almost like words. "The children," she whispered, staring at the markings on the stone. Figures carved in crude yet powerful lines, spirals and circles that matched the patterns she had seen once, long ago, in a vision from Bloodraven's eyes. They were here. "The who?" asked Jon Snow from the entrance. She turned. She had seen him so many times in dreams that his face felt like an old story given flesh. The jaw, the dark hair, the eyes like smoke. Yet there were lines at the corners of those eyes now that had not been there when she had watched him stand. On the wall as a boy, pain and weariness and something like stubborn hope had carved themselves into him. "King in the north," she said. "Jon Snow." "Daenerys Targaryen," he replied with a stiff bow. "I wish we'd met in warmer halls." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Your Grace," he said to Jon, "may I present the woman whose dragons will, we hope, keep all of us from becoming ice sculptures." Jon's gaze flicked briefly to the dragons crouched in the shadows of the cavern. Fear and awe warred plainly in his eyes, and something else, something like recognition. She wondered, abruptly, if he had dreamed of her as she had dreamed of him. "We have dragonglass," Daenerys said, gesturing at the walls. "Enough to arm an army, enough to arm a continent. You need it. I need you." He studied her for a long moment. She could have reached out then, as she had with Tyrion, and thrust a vision into his mind. She could have shown him the others marching across fields of corpses, the wall crumbling, Winterfell burning. She could have made it impossible for him to doubt her in any way. She did not. Instead, she slipped lightly into the eyes of a bat clinging to the ceiling and looked down at herself, standing with her hand on the stone, and at Jon, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. She watched the set of his shoulders, the tightness of his jaw. He is used to men doubting him, she thought. Used to shouting into a storm. If I strip him of that doubt too wholly, I strip him of something that makes him who he is. "We both face the same enemy," she said. "Let us face it together." He shook his head slightly. "My people will not kneel to a foreign queen. Your people will kneel to the dead if we fail," she said. "If we win, we can talk of crowns. If we lose, crowns will mean nothing. Help me forge weapons, King of the North. Help me march an army." "And your dragons?" he asked. "Will they fight for the living?" She looked up at Drogon, at Rhaegal, at Viserion. Through their eyes she saw herself and Jon, two tiny figures in a cave of black glass, fragile as candle flames. The dragons did not care for crowns either. They cared for fire and flesh and the sky. "I will fly them where they are needed," she said. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then I will send word. We'll mine your glass. We'll stand with you, if you stand with us." In another road, she had demanded his knee then and there. She had refused to move without it. That had led to shouting, to cold silences, to alliances born of desperation without trust. She had seen that path. She avoided it now with care. "I stand where the living stand," she said simply. His eyes met hers. For a heartbeat she saw, not in vision, but in the plain gaze of another soul, a reflection of herself. A person burdened by too much, chosen for things they did not fully understand, walking roads they did not entirely choose. "We'll see," he said. Later, when he had gone back to his ship and she stood alone in the cavern, she reached out for Bloodraven. "You did not push," the crow observed. "I could have made him see," she said. "That would have been quicker." "Quickness is not always good stewardship," said the crow. "A king or queen who compels belief makes obedient subjects. You need allies." "I cannot win this alone," she agreed softly. "No, you cannot." He showed her then, as she stood surrounded by black glass, the paths that lay ahead. Some she already knew. The battle in the snow, dragons falling from the sky, a spear of ice, a dragon's blue fire tearing through stone. Others were new. The possibility of peace between fire and ice, however brief. The chance of a world where the dead were beaten back long enough for children to grow without remembering their faces. In all of them, she saw herself. Sometimes she was a savior, sometimes a destroyer, often both. Always she was watching, through her own eyes, through the eyes of beasts, through the eyes of men who did not know their thoughts were shared. "What if I look too long?" she whispered, touching a shard of dragon glass. It was cold as ice, yet when she held it up to the torch, it seemed to drink the flame. "What if I lose myself in it? Then you will become what I am now," murmured Bloodraven. A voice on the other side of the bark. A ghost in the roots. "There are worse fates, but that is not what you were born for." "What was I born for?" she asked, not for the first time. "To rule," said the crow. "Not because you deserve it more than any other, or because your blood is purer. Because you are here and you have dragons and you can see. Rule well and the world will be less cruel. Rule badly and it will be more. That is all." She snorted. "That is all." The crow's chuckle rustled through the cave. In the end, the war with the dead was not won in one battle, nor by one queen, though songs would later pretend otherwise. There was the march north, through snow that squeaked beneath boots, through forests where the trees watched. There were councils in cold halls, fur and leather and steel vying with silk and dragonbone. There were mistrusts to be soothed, old hatreds to be quieted, long enough to face the greater threat. Daenerys stood atop the battlements of Winterfell and looked out over fields where men and women from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms stood together. Northern bannermen, knights of the Vale, men from the Reach who had once sworn to Tyrells now dead. A few hard-eyed Dornish, the last of the Riverlord's strength. The unsullied in their gray ranks, the Dothraki restless on their horses. It should not have been possible, yet there they were. She could see every weakness in their lines. She could see the places where men grumbled under their breath, resentful of fighting for a dragon queen. She could see, too, the flickers of bravery, the quiet acts of kindness. An old man handing his extra cloak to a shaking boy, a woman tying a charm to a spear haft. She could have watched the enemy all night. She could have sat in the Godswood with her hand upon the heart tree, slipping from raven to wolf to snowflake, counting every step the dead took toward them. Instead, she took only 3 breaths into the roots and then came back. "You are not going to watch them the whole time?" Jon asked, coming to stand beside her. His breath made clouds in the cold air. "I know enough," she said. "If I look too long, I will see only their numbers, their inevitability. I need to see my own people too." He studied her. "You've changed," he said. "So have you," she replied. They flew together in the battle that followed. The dead came in silence at first, a white wall moving against the dark. Then came the sound, a low, grinding moan like ice cracking. When they reached the lines of fire set before the trenches, Daenerys saw through a dozen eyes at once. Her own, squinting against the wind, Drogon's excited and hungry, a crow's circling high above the chaos. She saw where the dead were thickest. She sent dragonfire there, carving great swathes of burning corpses. She saw where they tried to slip around the flanks and shouted orders to the living, her voice carrying farther because men had learned to listen for it. When the Night King himself appeared, blue fire in hand, she felt his gaze strike her like a hammer even from afar. She saw in a flash all the roads where Viserion died shrieking, fell broken into a frozen lake. She saw the paths where she chased the Night King in blind fury and lost herself in the storm. She saw the ones where she held back too long and watched Winterfell fall. She chose, again, the narrowest path to trust. "Bran," she said aloud, though the boy sat in his chair below, eyes white as he rode the storm in ways she could not follow. Now, he was the other torch Bloodraven had spoken of, she realized. The boy who had come to the cave in the north and sat where Bloodraven's body had once been. Where Bloodraven's flesh had withered, Bran's had rooted. He saw along roots she could not. For a heartbeat, the Weirwood network thrummed like a harp string. She felt Bran's awareness brush hers, like the flicker of a second sun. The Night King turned his head, not toward her, as in so many visions, but toward the Godswood. And in that opening, as the dead surged and faltered, Arya Stark leapt from shadow like a whisper. Daenerys never saw the knife land in waking sight. She was too high in the air, too far, dragons screaming as they fought off whites attacking their wings. But she felt the change. It ran through the world like a shock. The cold that had seeped into every root and stone snapped. The dead froze and then crumbled. A sound rose, half scream, half sigh, from 1,000 throats at once, then vanished. Silence fell, then screaming again, but different now. Alive. After, in the long, stunned hours where the wounded were tended and the dead burned. The true dead, this time, the ones who would not rise again. Daenerys walked the field with Jon beside her. They moved among the makeshift pyres, faces sooty, hair tangled. Men bowed, women whispered, children stared. "They will remember you," Jon said quietly, as she paused to tuck a stray strand of hair from a dead girl's face. The child's eyes had been closed, but there was a smear of dragonglass dust on her cheek as if she'd wiped her nose with a hand just after carrying blades. "They will remember us," she replied. "And him." She tilted her head toward the Godswood, where Bran sat still as a tree. "And your sister, and every man and woman who stood their ground." Jon smiled faintly. "You could claim more credit if you wished. I have seen what that leads to," she said. She could also see already the roads branching from this victory. In some, the living turned their eyes back to old quarrels almost at once. North and South eyed each other with suspicion. The Lannisters clung to power in King's Landing. Men forgot that they had almost died together. She rode south with dragons blazing and took what was hers in blood and smoke. In others, she tried to bind the realm with gentle words and soft hands. Let Cersei sit the throne a little longer, gave time for conspiracies to knit themselves tighter. Her dragons grew restless on the Dragonstone cliffs. Famine crept into the riverlands. Small folk cursed all queens alike. She walked through these futures like a woman testing the ice on a river, feeling for cracks. "You're doing it again," Jon said softly one day later, when they stood together on Winterfell's walls. The sky was clear and pale. The air snapped in her lungs. Below them, men were rebuilding a burned tower. "Doing what?" she asked, though she knew. Her eyes had unfocused. Her hand at her side clenched around a splinter of weirwood she now carried always. She used it as a tether, a reminder of the tree and the cave and the reason she had begun this path. "Looking too far," he said. "I can tell. You go away, even when you're standing right here." "I am thinking," she said. He leaned on the parapet beside her. "You told me once you could show me what you see. You haven't since." "Why?" "Because it is difficult," she said slowly. "Because the more people I draw into my visions, the more those visions change. And the more they see me as something other than what I am. A woman, a queen, a person who can be wrong." "You can be wrong?" he asked dryly. "Frequently," she said. "I have seen as much." He laughed, then sobered. "My people fear you," he said. "They fear your dragons. They fear your eyes." "They are right to fear dragons," she said, "and to be wary of any ruler who sees more than they admit." "Are they right to fear you?" She looked down at her hands, at the pale scar on her palm where she had once clutched a burning brazier, at the calluses that had grown since sword, reins, quill, at the faint dark veins under her skin that sometimes felt like roots. "I hope they fear me less than they trust me," she said at last. "But that, Jon Snow, is not something I can force." He nodded. "You could try," he said. "You could walk in their dreams, send them visions, make them think you a goddess." "Yes," she said, "I could. And then I would be a tyrant, whether I burned them or not." He was silent a moment, watching the men below raise a new beam. "What will you do?" he asked finally. "After King's Landing, after the throne, if you take it." She closed her eyes. In an instant she saw 1,000 versions of the march south. She saw Cersei unleashing wildfire, saw herself respond with dragonfire so fierce it turned the city to glass. She saw herself hold back, at great cost, sending in spies and assassins, undermining Lannister power slowly until people left the city before her armies arrived. She saw herself sit the throne in all those futures, her face changing slightly each time, harder or softer, eyes darker or clearer. "I will rule," she said, with eyes open. "Can anyone do that?" he asked. "Always." "No," she said, "but I can try." She had learned enough by now to know that trying mattered. In the months that followed, as they marched south and the final struggle for the Iron Throne unfolded, Daenerys used her visions like a map and like a warning. She did not peer into every house in King's Landing, though she could have. She did not root out every whisper against her before it could form. Instead, she watched for storms. She saw Cersei's plan to fill the city with wildfire caches under bakeries and brothels. Seen through the eyes of a rat in the cellar of the Great September, the jars glowed sickly green. She saw, in one future, the fire catch transforming the city into a second Valyria. She saw herself flying above it, weeping and exulting both, a queen of ashes indeed. In this road, she chose another way. She sent small, quick men and women into those cellars, armed not with torches but with careful hands and knowledge. She used her sight sparingly to guide them past traps and guards. Jars were removed quietly, one by one, taken to the sea and dropped into deep waters where pressure and cold would keep them safe. When at last she unleashed her dragons in battle, their flame fell on Lannister fleets and scorpions, on walls and towers, not on streets where small folk huddled. Men still died. War was war, but the city did not burn. "What will they sing of?" Tyrion asked her, as they walked through streets still standing, their stones blackened only in patches, their people dazed but alive. The Dragon Queen who saw every plot before it hatched? The witch who knew when their crops would fail? The tyrant who watched them even when they slept? Perhaps the queen who did not burn them when she could have, she said. "Will they know that?" he asked quietly. She thought of the secret missions to the wildfire caches, the whispered instructions, the sleepless nights. She thought of the times she had seen someone think of raising a hand against her and had turned her gaze away, letting the moment rise and fall on its own. "No," she admitted. "They will not." "Does it matter?" Tyrion asked. She remembered Bloodraven's words. "Rule well, and the world will be less cruel. Rule badly, and it will be more. That is all." "It matters enough," she said. When she finally sat the Iron Throne, the hall was full. Lords from every corner of Westeros stood beneath its high, vaulted ceiling. There were Northerners in furs, Dornish in brightly dyed silks, Stormlanders with sea salt in their hair. There were small folk too, more of them than had ever been allowed into that hall at once, their caps crushed in their hands, their faces lifted like flowers to the light. The high windows had been opened. The smell of smoke and blood had been scrubbed from the stones as much as possible. The throne loomed above her, a twisted thing of black and gray, every sword a memory of a conquest. She had touched it once, cautiously, fingers tracing the cold metal. It had felt like any other chair. Now, sitting upon it, she felt not only the cold of the steel but the hum of the realm beneath her feet. She had walked that realm in dreams and visions for years now. She knew its hills and rivers, its towns and castles. She had seen its hidden cruelties and quiet kindnesses. It lay before her like a living thing. You could watch it all, Bloodraven had said to her on the last night before she took the city. His voice as dry as autumn leaves. Every plot, every prayer. You could be as the old gods are said to be. Eyes in every tree, ears in every brook. I could, she had said. And in doing so, I would turn every life into a story told only for me. I would leave them no shadows to hide in, no corners to be alone in. I would close my fist around the world until it could not breathe. And if closing that fist kept it safe? He asked. She had thought of Jon then, of the way he had looked at her atop Winterfell's wall, of Arya's knife in the dark, a thing no vision of hers had foreseen because she had not been looking, of Bran's still face beneath the heart tree, his mind moving in places she could not follow. Safety is not the only good, she said. If I take all their choices from them, even to save them, then I am no better than the masters I burned. Then how will you rule? Bloodraven had asked. It was the last question he ever put to her. She felt him fading even as he spoke, his life finally spent, his roots severed from the cave. With half your eye closed and half open? One foot in the dream and one in the waking. Yes, she said, exactly so. Now, upon the throne, she remembered that promise. She rested one hand on the arm of the chair, the other on her lap, over the place where the faint tracery of root veins lay under her skin. She could feel, if she wished, the heartbeat of the nearest weirwood, far to the north, in the God's Wood of Winterfell, where Bran watched with her. She could feel, too, the smaller trees in the Kingswood, their roots searching for older paths. She closed her eyes. For a moment she let her sight reach out, sweeping across the realm. She saw a ship leaving Old Town with stolen books in its hold, bound for distant shores. She saw a man in White Harbor plotting rebellion. She saw a baker in Lannisport giving a loaf to a child too poor to pay. She saw a hedge knight considering whether to take a purse to kill a rival's heir. She saw a woman in Dorne writing a letter asking for fairer trade laws. She marked the greatest dangers, the knife for hire, the would-be rebel with a taste for bloodshed rather than justice. She tucked them away in her mind, to be watched, to be answered not with fire alone but with law and persuasion where possible. Then, deliberately, she pulled back. She released the image of the baker, let his kindness be his own. She let the ship sail without knowing every word in those stolen tomes. She did not peer into every bedchamber, every prayer. She left room in the world for secrets. Her eyes opened to the great hall. The lords were watching. The small folk were watching. Her dragons, coiled on the ledges above like living gargoyles, watched too, their eyes like coals in the half-light. Daenerys Targaryen, last scion of an exiled house, breaker of chains, rider of dragons, seer of roots and fire, sat on the Iron Throne and did the hardest thing she had ever done. She did not speak of visions. She did not tell them she had seen 100 ways this day could end. She did not promise them paradise, nor threaten them with damnation. She simply met their eyes, one by one, and spoke. "I am not your god," she said. Her voice rang through the hall, clear as a bell. "I am your queen. I have seen this realm from Dragonback and through dreams, in its glories and its shames. I know what we are." She paused. No one moved. "I will use what I see to keep you safe when I can," she went on. "I will use it to know when winter comes early to send grain before you starve. I will use it to see when your neighbors sharpen knives instead of plows, and I will send riders to cool their blood. I will not use it to sit in your heads and judge you for every thought. The law will be written in ink and steel, not only in my dreams." There was a murmur at that, confused and wondering. "You have lived under blind kings," she said, "under mad ones, under men who used their power to hide their own sins and magnify those of others. I will not pretend I will never err." A faint smile touched her lips. "I have erred before. I will again. But when I do, you will see it. And I will see it, for my eyes are open." She felt, then, the faint feather touch of Bran's awareness through the weirwood network, like another bird alighting on a far branch. She felt, too, the absence where Bloodraven had once been. an old hollow in the tree now overgrown. "You will not do this alone," a thought brushed hers. "No," she answered silently. "I will not." She rose slowly from the throne. The hall was utterly still. "Rule me?" cried a voice from the back, breaking the silence. It was a woman's voice, cracked with age. "Rule me justly if you can." Daenerys smiled, and the dragons shifted, their wings rustling like leaves. "I will try," she said. It was a small promise, after all the grand ones she had heard in her life. Yet of all the roads she had walked in visions, it was the one she most wanted to keep. Outside, beyond the Red Keep and the city and the patched-over scars of war, the wind moved through the Kingswood's branches. Far to the north, it stirred the leaves of a weirwood in Winterfell's Godswood. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, in roots and memories and old, slow sap, an echo of an old man's laughter lingered and faded. The realm breathed, and upon a throne of swords and stories, watched by dragons and crows and the eyes of 100,000 souls, a queen with the magic of Bloodraven in her veins and the warmth of dragonfire in her heart began, at last, to rule not only by what she saw, but by what she chose not to see.